Obviously, you're a pioneer of technology for churches. When you started Flocknote, you first started going to churches and saying, "Hey, I've got this idea. You should do this." What do you remember about that?
Well, so this was when I first started doing this. So maybe it was before Flocknote. It was something that I started before Flocknote and kind of turned into Flocknote. But I was still an engineer at Lockheed Martin at the time, but had gotten really passionate about my faith and entrepreneurially minded, and so I was wanting to do something, and yes, started coming up with tools that I could use for to help parishes better reach their people and communicate what they need to communicate. And certainly when you first approach them, this was the time 2008, 2000, 2007, 2008, 2009. Facebook groups had just started, but MySpace was probably still slightly more popular than Facebook was when we first started. So it was that kind of era, but everything was free. So the new model was, advertising based, free software. And so the expectation too for them was that everything would be free. So getting them to pay anything was very difficult. They didn't have really a software budget in those days. They might have had some database tool they used in the back end, but for the most part, they spent, way more on donuts each week than they do on software tools that would help them in these ways. So it was really creating a new market in a sense, especially the software as a service model was very early. And so it took a lot of work at first to just convince them that this was valuable, that it's something that is worth paying for, that you're going to get more value out of it than you're going to pay into it. And it took years to kind of work on that and create the market almost. But it was worth it. And it was a problem I was really passionate about solving. So stuck with it.
At what point did you realize this is going to work?
Well, there's something about the moment somebody first pays you to do something,
Yeah.
and then they keep paying you, and you go, okay, we did something that works, which is an important lesson for entrepreneurs. It's an important moment, I think, when you create something that's really valuable and people agreed it was valuable. It wasn't just something you thought was a good idea. So that moment, and then it's just a matter of multiplying it, which is another problem to solve, but it's possible. So that happened very early on, but it wasn't for many years. We were so small that I always assumed that, some big player, some big company would come in and just copy what we were doing and then steal all the business, and we wouldn't make it because we were bootstrapped, all the way through really, and just grew at the pace we could grow based on the clients we were getting. And that was very slow at first, and it kind of snowballs over the years and gets more and more and more, which was fantastic. But early on, we were very limited in resources. I was by myself for the first 3 years. And my wife was still working at the time at her job. She was a writer at a marketing agency. And we had 2 kids. So I was at home with 2 babies and trying to run the company. And, I was the programmer and the support and the sales all by myself. And, it definitely was in question all those years of whether this would really work or not. But I knew that it was a problem that needed solving, and I knew it was worth solving. And so I figured if I stuck at it long enough that it would work. And turned out that it worked. And it was just a lot slower than you think. You expect it to kind of go a lot faster, and it's just grinding it out year after year, a little bit more, until again, you kind of 10 years later, you're looking at it and it's like, wow, okay, we made it, So it took 4 or 5 years before I was like, okay, like I feel really good about this, but we were still very tight. We were always spending money as soon as we got it. Or, if we knew we were going to get it next month, we were spending it now, but it wasn't until, probably 8, 9, 10 years into it, where it was like, okay, this was all worth it. This was worth not saving as much money as I should have for a long time, and quitting my job and not making anything for many years and all those kinds of things. It was finally, worth it in that, and mostly because it was really helping churches do something really significant in the world.
So when you decide to quit your job at Lockheed Martin, what did the people around you, what did the people in your life think about that life choice?
I think most of them, I mean, I think it was something none of them would have done. Not many of them would have done. I think it's a really good job, great company, great people I was working with, and I really enjoyed the people I worked with there. And even a lot of the work I did was really interesting stuff, um, and very challenging. But yeah, at the time, the idea that you would quit your job when you have that great of a job, um, just most we're just taught that that's not something you do, until you got the next thing lined up for, you do the responsible thing. So it was definitely a leap of faith in that sense. And, but it was also right after I got married. So that was another dynamic that was interesting because essentially I was working, 50-hour a week at Lockheed Martin. And then I'd come home and I'd work 30 hours a week on this other, project. And once I got married, my wife was like, I want to actually spend time with you. So I need you to just, why don't you quit your job? And luckily she was such a blessing and very supportive. And she's the one that told me to do it. She's like, you need to just do this full time and give it a shot. But it was a good lesson to think through. A lot of times I think we kind of don't take risks because we don't define them very well. And they remain these ambiguous things you just never do, or that's too risky. But when you define out, well, what's the worst that really happened, and when I told the people I was leaving Lockheed, they were like, well, if you want to come back, just let us know. I'm like, okay, it's good to know, right? You can get another job one day. But what's the worst that happens? It fails and I got to find another job. Luckily I'd saved a lot of money up to that point and been smart and with financially and all that, and didn't have any debt. And, my wife was working at the time. So all those things came together as a huge blessing for us to make it possible. But when you add all that up, you go, it's really not that risky. It seems crazy to a lot of people, but it's not. And people also sort of, there's a bias built into what you're already doing that you think there's no risk to it just because it's the status quo. But, people get laid off from jobs all the time. There's risk staying where you're at, and so you got to remember that too. It's not a choice between no risk and risk. It's two different types of risks and making those decisions. But no, it was a little challenging, but I had a lot of support.
Some great insights there. So today Flocknote serves 10,000 churches, about 40 employees. What is the most satisfying part of that?
The people I get to work with, for sure. Definitely the core passion for me was to help the church get the message out. I mean, that was something that I realized in my generation, people falling away from the church, and they didn't know what they were leaving. And it hadn't been communicated to them what they were leaving. And so for me, that was just at the heart of this thing. But then it was also just practical things. Like I was getting more and more involved at my own parish, and they just couldn't tell people that stuff was happening. They were doing a lot of great things, but they just weren't telling anybody about it, or they didn't have a means to just get the message directly to their people like they needed to. So that seemed like a pretty straightforward problem to try to solve. And that's where we tackled it from. So certainly that core passion of solving the church's problem, that continues to be very satisfying, and we're continuing to make a huge impact, a bigger and bigger impact in the church, inside the Catholic Church and outside the Catholic Church, and just helping people build their flocks, build relationships in their communities, and spread the gospel and go after that lost sheep, which is sort of core to our mission at Flocknote. But secondarily to that, over time, my passion for building a great company has equaled that at least. And I just get to work with the most amazing people. And I think God's blessed us with this amazing mission together, and just the friendships that we build as a team, to see these people blossom into, just what their potential is, I think, which is just so great. Is just so rewarding. And we've continued. Something I got very passionate about was employee ownership. Within our market, as most software as a service markets are right now, there's a lot of investment and acquisitions and all that stuff. And there's good parts of that. And there's been some negative effects of that, I think, too, in the church space. But it was just something I became more and more passionate about, was I love Chesterton. I love distributism. I love the idea that society works better when property is more widely distributed in general. And and I love Catholic social teaching on this. The encyclical by Pope Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, speaks a lot about the rights of worker and this relationship, the rights of labor and workers, and this relationship between capital and labor, between the owners and the workers, and that there's this ideal. Again, I'm an idealist. That when the worker is the owner, that all of these other synergies start to happen. That all these interests align and they're not competitive anymore. And of course, you see that in the extremes where unions have served a necessary purpose in a lot of cases, but you also see the worst of that when you have a body divided against itself. You have the owners fighting at the expense of employees, and employees doing things sometimes that even harm the company itself to try to look out for their own interests. And that's just such a unfortunate situation, I think. And so when you bring those things together, which I'd love to just see more in general in industry, beautiful things happen. So that was one of my favorite things we've done so far at Flocknote, was launch our ESOP, our employee stock ownership plan. Everyone in our team becomes a part owner of the company. And so last year was actually my favorite award. We give awards out in our company every year. And the team got me my favorite award yet, which was Co-Owner of the Year award. And so I went from being the full owner to being a co-owner. And is my favorite award I've gotten yet, because this whole journey we've been on, just to be able to go on it fully together, where we're sharing the burden of this, it's a burden too. It's a responsibility that comes with ownership. But of course you get the benefit of the fruits of all of that as well as you develop it. And so it's been really amazing to see our team just light up at that opportunity to become an owner, a part owner, a co-owner of the company. But the way they treat it now, it's theirs, and we're doing this together, and it's just an amazing thing. So I'm super excited about that, and where that's taken us.